Hello, you're watching Come Home America with Nick Hankoff, the podcast that narrates and navigates America's twin crises of identity and order. This is episode 9. Have we learned nothing? Have we learned nothing? The election was less than a week ago, and people are out in the streets celebrating that Joe Biden is declared the president. I mean, isn't this the same media that declared he was going to win in a landslide, but also at the same time it was going to take weeks and weeks to count the votes? You know, that very confusing cross messaging. It was like the polls showed Biden was going to win in a big landslide, which didn't happen. And also we were told on social media, hey, beware of election night because no one's going to be able to declare victory. This could take weeks. It's a huge turnout, and mail-in ballots take days after the election to come in. So, well, what happened? No landslide, and both candidates declared victory night of. Biden said we're on our road to victory. Great. Not declaring victory at all. Trump doesn't speak like a politician. Trump says, the truth, essentially, his truth. But essentially he says we won the election and everyone freaks out. Biden goes up there and says, we are going to win. And no one, that's not as bad or something. I mean, Biden went out there first. What was Trump supposed to say to that? Trump was leading, and then they stopped counting the votes. You know the story. But is there election fraud? Is it going to be overturned? Is Trump going to win in the courts? You got these people crying tears of joy for Biden, saying that it's all over, we're returning to normal. And I have to remind you that it is still 2020. 2020, this current year, unlike any other current year before. And I say it's still possible. It's still possible Trump could win in the Supreme Court. He could be decided our next president. But what is the lesson learned? Have we learned nothing? I mean, regardless of who is the next president, there are deep problems in this country. That's why this show is called Come Home America. And it's not about who the president is. I mean, you know that I was hoping that Trump would win outright, and we just don't know yet. The media's declared it, but what does that mean? Nothing. So we are going to get into a few things on the show, and we will get into some detail about the election. These 4 or 5 states where there are these anomalies, and what's to be believed and what's not to be believed. Do we need to pay attention at all to this fraud fight? There's rallies and protests going on and challenges in court. So we'll decide if all of this is really worth our time and important. And then beyond the election, no matter who's president, what's next, And let's start here. Abolish the popular vote. I wrote this for the Daily Caller. And let's take a look at it here. Could abolishing the popular vote be better for America? A lot of times, if Trump had actually won, been declared the winner anyway, people would say, again, he lost the popular vote. And again, the Electoral College is delegitimized, abolish the Electoral College. This happens every 4 years at least, a call to abolish the Electoral College by people who don't understand it or maybe don't care. We're used to the usual defense of the Electoral College, but I take a different tack here, not just defending the Electoral College, but actually abolishing the popular vote. You want to abolish something. They say they want to abolish the Electoral College. Abolish the popular vote. I mean, do you care about democracy? Because if you cared about democracy, you would get rid of this popular vote. What do we get for it in return? Well, we had 71 million people vote for Trump, 75 million vote for Biden, something around those figures. We're going to check those Biden figures, by the way. But we know Trump got 71 million legal votes. Hello. And what does that get us? We're just attacked like an onslaught of ads. The YouTube ads you got to click through, the mail-ins, not the mail-in ballots, but the mail you get for these presidential elections. You get TV, radio. You're just hit with it on social media. Every corporation, every woke capital business out there has to tell you how to vote or to make sure you vote or whatever. So We're just getting bombarded with all of this propaganda. And it's like, America used to run a little differently. Up until 1820 and even through the Civil War years, there weren't like direct popular votes of the president. And now we still don't have a direct popular vote of the president, but it gets more direct as time goes on, where the popular vote influences the Electoral College. And I just think it would be much better to not have this burden on us. It's the sacred right to vote, and you got to go vote, your civic duty and all this. But what do we get in return? What we get is a more emboldened, centralized state. And so the more the vote has been expanded, the more direct popular vote has been promoted and expanded, the greater the centralized power in the presidency in particular. And so the political class grows, and we're really stuck holding the bag, like with what? Our decision half the time isn't even the choice we wanted, and yet we're expected to be so invested into it. And even when it is the choice we want, they don't live up to their promises. It really should be more of a political class decision, so that we're not fighting with one another. We shouldn't have these tribalistic sort of like red team, blue team civil wars every 4 years. And now they don't even end every 4 years. Now they run right through the election and post-election. So it's getting really dangerous. We need to just cut this stuff out. So, there's talk of civil war. And I write in this Daily Caller article that, civil war, the term is very fashionable. You can find lots of articles talking about it. But I say that such buzz should probably be chalked up to another craze or hobgoblin. H.L. Mencken, a great critic of democracy, talked about hobgoblins. He said that civilization, in fact, grows more maudlin and hysterical, especially under democracy. It tends to degenerate into a mere combat of crazes. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed, and hence clamorous to be led to safety. But by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. That's H.L. Mencken, and that's the way I basically see this talk of civil war, just another level up of the hobgoblins. But it is true, though, that the political divides in the country are sharpening, and it's just getting unavoidable. It's tearing apart communities in the country, so that the end of an election no longer signals a pause in the political and cultural scrimmages. So the popular vote contributes to this escalation by thrusting every individual into the political trenches, when we really should have a more distinct political class. And, our direct vote should matter for local and state elections. And we put together our state representatives. The state representatives should really have most of the control over the electors at the Electoral College. And from there, it's really outlined in the U.S. Constitution quite well. And it would be good to return to that for the sake of democracy. It's just not a given. You can't say that it's a given that just because people have the right to vote that their lives are going to be made better. I mean, and what I mean is not just distinctly the right to vote, but particularly voting on the president. Like, just because you are going to vote for the president in a more direct way, that should necessarily mean that democracy is better. I mean, Ryan McMakin at the Mises Institute asks, how is 50 separate democratic elections less democratic than one gigantic mass vote, right? And what this is supposed to take into account is a collection of regions, a collection of states, a collection of really societies that make up the United States of America, and so that we are not all just one size fits all blob. We weren't really designed that way in the founding, and a lot of people would like to make us that way, and we have to resist that. That's what Come Home America is all about. So check out that article of mine at the Daily Caller. I have it linked below. But I did write that, however unlikely it is that we will change our system, Americans should ponder whether the popular vote, far from empowering them, has allowed them to be enraged, divided, and used. And it doesn't have to be this way. Okay, so we've got that set aside just to think about, help us understand what's the state of democracy, what does it mean to be a good democracy. And, what we have now is we were fighting over who should be the next president up into the election, and now we're fighting over actually who is the next president, because it doesn't look like we're going to redo the vote. it doesn't look like we're going to redo the vote, especially getting rid of the popular vote this time around, right? So what do we do with our situation today? Is it worth it to fight over the next 70 days of Trump's presidency and support these legal maneuvers to challenge the elections in the courts and even ultimately to the Supreme Court? I give an emphatic yes to this. If it were feasible for me, I would probably attend one of these rallies. In previous episodes, I've said do not attend protest and rallies, in the sense that those, for Trump supporters and other conservatives and libertarians, a lot of the time we were countering the Black Lives Matter or countering Antifa or trying to protect businesses from riots, and that could get really dangerous. And now it's a little different because, who's going to come out and counter someone saying that we need to make sure that the election was transparent? I mean, you'd have to be really insane and stuck in some narrative to go out and want to counter protest these people who just are saying, don't steal the election from Trump. Okay. Maybe you don't think the election was stolen from Trump, but you would agree that you wouldn't want an election stolen from anyone. So the fact that these protests are happening and Trump will be holding rallies is a perfectly fine thing. And because nothing's been certified, all we have are media projections and the social media and the media trying to control our speech and tell us what to believe before anything's official, before the states, the people's representatives actually certify this election. So, Arizona was called for Biden very early on at Fox News, and Fox News, I don't believe, has ever retracted it. Maybe they did eventually, but I know CNN retracted that first. So people want to say that Fox News is pro-Trump. They've been notoriously anti-Trump this election year, just as wrong on the polls, if not more so, than the wider media. And so who's really stuck in the narrative here? Who's really stuck on the talking points? Is it the Trumpists who are just mad that they lost an election and they can't face up to it? That's a lot of projection trying to avoid puns here on this show. But it is projection from the left, because we saw what the left did immediately after Trump won the 2016 election. And really it never stopped through all 4 years of his presidency, whether it was top-down organized efforts on, these fake scandals of Russiagate or the Ukraine Gate or Kavanaugh, whatever it was. You're just not going to see that from the right for the next 4 years. I think, of course, you're going to have the theories running around, but it's not going to be. There's not going to be an insane impeachment effort on Joe Biden to the extent that there was on Trump, with absolutely no evidence and really just made up charges that couldn't even be, couldn't even be substantiated or falsified. It was all theatrics the last 4 years. So, you'll have a split government. If Biden is president, it'll be a split government. But that really helps us understand how anomalous this election is and why it is worth challenging. Because why is it a split government we're going into? If Biden received more votes than any other president in history, then how is that? How is it possible that Democrats didn't flip any state legislative houses? Only Republicans flipped state legislative houses? How is it that Democrats lost seats in the House of Representatives at the federal level? How is it that Republicans maintain the Senate majority and all these governors across the states? So it is curious that in a few select swing states, Joe Biden's numbers were so much better and so outperformed Obama and Hillary. You got to remember the historic turnout for Obama in 2008. This eclipsed all of that, and Biden outperforms them in Wisconsin and Michigan, but not in Ohio, not in Florida. It's just an odd thing where some states stick out like a sore thumb. And of course you have tens of thousands of dead people allegedly voting. We don't know exactly if those votes ever counted, but we know that attempts were made to vote under dead people's names, maiden names. We have just strange turnouts, like 90% turnout rate in Milwaukee and other areas. So the swing states just acted differently And even county by county in some of these places, the swings were very odd. You had certain regions swinging, not even certain, within a same region, I should say, within one region of Wisconsin, you had one county swinging one way towards Republicans from 2016, and neighboring to them with the same demographics and the same previous voting patterns swinging the opposite way. How does this make sense? Like, how is it possible that there's such a harsh swing, not small swings, but 5, 6, 7 points in one direction, and then their neighbors 5, 6, 7 points in another direction? It would be one thing if it was just a northern region, southern region, eastern region of one state like Wisconsin, but we're talking like within these regions, neighboring counties where the counties are really the same. They could just be one gigantic county. Why would you have one set of people going one way and the other, and it's all ahistorical, and also at the same time down ballot Republicans are just doing better? Like, it's odd that you would have Joe Biden's name filled out on a ballot and left blank tens of thousands of times, and it's all mail in, and maybe some of them don't have postmarks, or they come in after the election, or we don't know if the signatures match or not. There's just question after question after question, and they're legitimate, and they're going to court, and it would be nice to get some transparency and something settled. But this election is unlike any before. This is not like the year 2000. This is not like 2008, 12, or any other election that I've ever voted in my lifetime, or really in American history, where like half of the ballots came in by mail. And for what? This COVID thing. And that's for another episode to really take down the COVID nonsense. But you see where it brought us, and how could it have been any different? The states were not prepared. We were told it was going to be a massive turnout. We were told it was going to be record mail-in ballots, and yet they have to stop counting. You have Texas count all of their votes on election night, but some states that are very important just can't get it together. Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania, they just can't get it together and just count the votes, and they have to stop counting the votes and then start up again in the middle of the night, and which hugely tilts it only one way. All the glitches that swing votes just happen to swing it in one direction, and it's caught on social media. It's too much. It's too much, and the country can't handle it. The country shouldn't be expected to just take the media's word for it when the media got so much wrong leading up to the election, not to mention got us into the Iraq war, and now we have this huge proponent of the Iraq war coming to the White House, presumably in Joe Biden. So disaster after disaster upon disaster, and Trump is fighting it, and I think it's a good thing. Looking forward, pardon me as I shake my studio, but going forward past the election, and this is not to diminish challenging the election results, which is totally legitimate, and we'll see which way it goes. But regardless of who's the president, going forward, the agenda has to be to, in the case of a Joe Biden presidency, really civil disobedience against these COVID lockdowns and mask mandates that he wants to push on a national scale. Just a disgusting display of authoritarianism that we would never have seen under Trump. And so that's what we need is real effective civil disobedience in that regard against the COVID lockdown and takeover of the economy and the society, which has been favored by large multinational organizations at the expense of small businesses and communities across the country. So that is number one if Biden is president. We really need to push for more choice in education. Get people off the dependency of the grand narrative of the country. Stop centralizing everything. Education is so centralized, and as far as decentralizing things, you could not decentralize one thing faster for the good of the country than the education system. So I'll look forward to talk about that on this show a lot more in the future. But really looking at the state of the country and whether or not we should be living with one centralized government in D.C. Like, why not entertain very seriously notions of secession, or at the very least soft secession, nullification, some way where people can live the way they want to in their states and not be bullied by other states. One of these COVID bills, one of these multi-trillion dollar spending bills from Congress, was effectively a bailout for blue cities and blue states by red states that were in better shape financially, to bail out local and municipal and state governments. And this is what will really cause a civil war in the future if there was going to be one. And I'm not, this show is not going to be about civil war for the most part. But I think that if you end up teaching people that the red team is totally illegitimate and deserve to be on lists and watched over and not allowed to have jobs or whatever because they entertain the wrong thoughts, but you're going to force them to pay for the municipal decisions of other communities and subsidize their failed programs, and especially their education systems that, ultimately teach that half the country is the enemy, then, that's no way that the country will not survive that. It's one thing to put your children and grandchildren in debt slavery under the national debt. Now imagine putting them under some other state's debt where it's just a totally different outlook. And so we got to stop trying to live at the expense of one another and just try to live amongst one another. And that does mean decentralization. So that has to be the key going forward. And, for the next 70 days, we can talk about the election, and then beyond that, we have to start getting beyond that. So this show might be covering the election depending on how far it goes in the courts and what happens in these protests and rallies. What should Trump be doing? Now, Trump, yes, he's not going to be directly involved in the court stuff, but he's going to be holding these rallies around it. Rallies around his legal efforts to overturn this projected election decision, and good for him. But that really can't be his legacy. I mean, it might make him feel good that he's not giving up, that he's a fighter, and sure enough, that's who he is. But it's really not enough to really hit back at his opponents hard. He can't risk putting his whole bet on the Supreme Court. He needs to really take the fight to the war party, the neoconservatives, the warmongers that backed Biden and helped put him in office. And that is ending the wars, bringing the troops home, not just for Christmas like he promised, but bringing them home for Thanksgiving. Order the troops home now, and also pardon Edward Snowden, pardon Julian Assange, pardon Ross Ulbricht, everyone. Just pardon all the enemies of the military-industrial complex and the warfare state. And that would really give Trump a long-lasting legacy, because his legacy right now is pretty good on the pro-life, federal judges side of things. But beyond that, it's like, what's really his legacy that's not just going to be overturned like Obama's was? It's this very weak legacy that's out there. And so, maybe Trump was overconfident that he would get a second term and push a lot harder on some things. And maybe some people will say I'm naive for even thinking Trump would do anything good like those actions I just listed. But he doesn't have to do it out of the goodness of his heart. If only he knows that it will be the best revenge and the best spiteful acts out of office to really hurt his opponents, then let that be the motivation to bring the troops home, right? So we do hope for that if Trump is not winning a second term, which he still could. So we'll see. Now, we've seen the left come out and call for unity, which is a total joke. And I always push against unity. I had an article in the Advocates for Self-Government way back at the start of the 2020 election period, early 2019, saying, be on the lookout for these candidates calling for unity, and do not fall for this trap, because unity, it's Biden when he says they're not red states, they're not blue states, we're the United States, and it's all that is code for total top-down control from the federal government in D.C. And this is what we cannot have. And if the left isn't calling for unity, they are actually calling now. I mean, you could see Jake Tapper from CNN on Twitter. You can see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, other folks aligned with the Pete Buttigieg campaign, to put us on lists, to archive those of us who took a paycheck from Trump, which I didn't, or supported Trump, bought merchandise, which I did. Anything that crosses a line, they want to make enemies of the state of those people and, do with them what they will. But why can't the left just leave us alone? It's like they only have two choices, right? They have to either totally obliterate you and dehumanize you, or they have to just smother you to death with their love of unity or something, to bring you into their fold. When I think the right wing is going to offer the real alternative to this, and conservatives have to do this in the Trumpian vein if they must, but it has to be decentralization. And, Trump did a pretty good job compared to previous Republican presidents of not over-centralizing things in D.C. I mean, he had ridiculous things going through CDC regarding COVID and a lot of this top-down structure. But ultimately, the governors decided things. And basically that should be the direction, is moving towards the state, towards the local level, down to the community, and even ultimately the individual in some sense. But really, the atomization of individuals is also something to beware as a false gift of freedom. So that is going to basically wrap up the show here. We got into a little bit of the details of the election, and this could go to the Supreme Court. We do want to be talking about local efforts, but as long local efforts to revive community, but as long as this election hovers over us and people are using it as a weapon to clobber their fellow American with, then I do want to cover that because it is a threat to community and a threat to a revival in the sense of what America was supposed to be, which is a collection of communities and states living side by side in their own way. So that's my sort of reflection on the election, what's important for us to focus on, what Trump needs to do. And with all of that in mind, there are those threats out there. Be careful when you go to these rallies. Don't fear a Trump presidency if you're on the other side. Have no fear. And I'm going to leave you all with this Bible verse of 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 13 to 14. Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is right? But even if you do suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. Thank you for tuning in. This was episode 9 of Come Home America with Nick Hankoff. In our next episode, please tune in for episode 10 because we're bringing back guests. The show launched on a couple of big guests in episode 1 and 2. We had Michael Bolden and Scott Horton. But episode 10, I am so excited for this one. We are talking to Dissident Mama of dissidentmama.net. So do not miss it. We will see you again soon. Thanks for subscribing. To all of you new subscribers out there, don't forget to hit the bell for notifications and share and comment and like. Let me know what you think of the show down below. Thank you so much again. We'll see you in the next one.